The president's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, has received a sentence of 47 months in federal prison for tax crimes and bank fraud. Just under 4 years in federal prison is what he's looking at. But that is also well below the sentencing guidelines that were spelled out for Manafort's crimes. Before the sentencing today, it's interesting, we contacted former senior FBI and Justice Department official Chuck Rosenberg to ask Chuck, because he used to be the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, we asked him what we should watch for today at this sentencing, basically what we should expect. And Chuck told us, quote, "If he goes low, don't be shocked." I don't know if I'm shocked by the amount of time that Paul Manafort is getting. I think I still remain the capacity just to be shocked by the fact that the campaign chairman for the sitting president of the United States is going to prison at all. But for some perspective, now that we've got these numbers, joining us now is Barb McQuade, former U.S. attorney in Michigan. She was in the courtroom for much of Manafort's trial in Virginia. Barb, thanks very much for being here. It's good to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rachel.
So having seen a lot of that trial, knowing what you know about Judge Ellis, knowing the sentencing guidelines, the overall context of Manafort's case, what is your reaction to the sentence that Manafort got tonight?
Well, I still think this is an absurdly low sentence in light of the sentencing guidelines. I did observe Judge Ellis to be kind of quirky and also to have expressed some hostility about this case and the special counsel and Manafort's connection to President Trump. I don't know that those things informed his decision. One of the things that you often see in cases is judges who impose very lenient sentences against white-collar defendants. And, you know, the sentencing guidelines are based on real data that the U.S. Sentencing Commission collects from around the country. It's based on real cases, and the idea behind it is we don't want unwarranted disparities between sentences. So if you commit a crime in Washington, D.C. or New York or Texas, you're likely to get the same sentence regardless of where the judge is who sentences you. And so that's what the guidelines are there to serve, is that purpose, to give you that baseline so that equal crime is being punished equally. To drop down from 19 years to 24 years, all the way down to 4 years, I think suggests that the wealthy and the powerful do better in court than many other defendants do. And I think it is an attack on the legitimacy of the criminal justice system. If you are someone who is indigent or lacking in power, I think you look at a sentence like this and it causes people to have less trust in the criminal justice system.
Barb, separate and apart from what Paul Manafort will face next week in D.C., just imagining that's not going to happen, just with this sentence that he got tonight, which, again, you're describing as absurdly low, absurdly light, given the sentencing guidelines here, how long should we expect that he'll actually serve? I keep hearing there's no parole in federal prison, but people can get time off for good behavior, can't they?
Yeah, that's right. Since 1987, when the sentencing guidelines went into effect, the Sentencing Reform Act, there has been no parole in the federal system. So unlike what you might see in the state system, where after somebody serves a portion of the sentence, they're eligible to go before the parole board and be able to be released after that. That does not exist in the federal system. But there is something called good time, where defendants can earn up to 54 days per year to provide an incentive for them to behave themselves while they're in prison. So if you do the math, roughly 4 years, 54 days per year removed from that, that adds up to, what, 216 days, about 7 months. So 7 months off of the 47 is at 40. You mentioned the 9 months for credit for time served. Off of the 40 gets him to 31 months. And so I think that's the actual time that he will serve starting today.
Provided that he gets all the good time to which he is potentially entitled.
Well, that's a good point. If he doesn't behave himself, then he wouldn't. And then, of course, Judge Jackson sits there next week and has the ability to impose up to 10 years and could make every bit of that consecutive. So he could see an additional 10 years added onto that.
Well, when Judge Jackson makes that decision next week, obviously that's going to be fascinating to watch. She's a totally different judge. It's a different jurisdiction. She's looking at a totally different set of felonies. There's a big difference in the set of circumstances that brought him before her for sentencing in terms of his guilty plea, his botched cooperation deal. I mean, she's the judge who, I think, revoked his bail in the first place, and so he had to serve time in jail while he was awaiting trial in the first place. There's a whole different narrative that goes into explaining what Judge Jackson's going to decide next week. Specifically, though, in terms of how judges make their decisions, is she allowed to take into consideration the length of time that he was sentenced for this week? Is she essentially allowed to pass a little bit of judgment on what Judge Ellis did tonight and factor that into what she gives Manafort next week?
No, not necessarily, but she can decide whether it is concurrent or consecutive. Judge Ellis was looking at just the case before him, which involved financial frauds, bank fraud, failure to declare foreign bank accounts, and tax counts, and that's his case. She's going to look at a very different case, as you mentioned, that involves obstruction of justice, the failed cooperation agreement. She knows a lot about this case, too, because of the hearings that she's had to hold to have fact-finding on his failure to cooperate in the breach of that cooperation agreement. So she's looking at a very different case. And so, no, I don't think she should be considering what Judge Ellis did in his case, but I do think she can decide that 10 years is an appropriate sentence in her case and that it is appropriate to make that consecutive to the sentence that Judge Ellis imposed.
One last quick question for you, Barb. Manafort, as I was just discussing with Gerstein, didn't really express remorse, didn't really sort of take responsibility for his crimes the way that a lot of defendants do when it comes to their allocution at sentencing. The way that we don't have a transcript yet from the hearing because it went so late, but Gerstein told us that the judge basically expressed surprise that Manafort didn't express remorse when he had the opportunity to in court before Ellis handed down this sentence. Should we think of that in terms of Manafort angling for a pardon, do you think? I mean, him not saying I did anything, even at that point, not saying I did anything wrong, not saying that he's sorry for what he did, not saying that he feels bad about it or there was anything wrong about his behavior. Should we think about that behavior in court when we think about the prospect of a presidential pardon for Manafort?
I don't think so. I don't think it matters. Remember, he pleaded guilty in the District of Columbia to all of the remaining counts in the Eastern District of Virginia case as well as that case. And so I don't think so. And in fact, a pardon doesn't mean it's not the same as an appeal. It doesn't mean that you were innocent. What it says is we are expressing mercy and forgiveness for you for committing this crime. And in fact, ordinarily, part of the pardon is an acceptance of responsibility and remorse. What I think this is instead is arrogance. And you see it very frequently in white-collar cases where the defendant comes in and says, I feel so much shame, Your Honor. I have been punished enough already. Why, I can't even go into my country club without feeling a sense of shame, and getting letters from prominent people to write support for a lenient sentence. You know, tell that to the indigent defendant who doesn't have the opportunity to make those arguments. I think it is the arrogance that goes with being wealthy and powerful.
Barb McQuade, former U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Michigan. It is an honor to have you as a colleague always, but especially on nights like this. Barb, thank you.
Thanks very much, Rachel.
All right, a lot more to get to tonight, so stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.